be focused on South-to-South partnership relationships, looking at the lessons, the benefits, the challenge, and opportunities there. I think the audio is coming through now. This is very much an exploratory conversation, and in planning we frame it as a discussion and a dialogue of discovery. And at its heart, we're looking at building a shared understanding of what are South-to-South partnerships, what are the lessons that we can learn from each other as part of the Global South, where are the challenges, where are the benefits, what are the opportunities for enhancing this. So our various panelist speakers bring with them particular insights and perspectives on this topic. In order to make sure that we create prioritized time for engagement, I'm going to give each panelist 5 minutes to share some opening remarks. And then I want to actually open up for engagement with everyone on the floor. So we want to maximize the amount of time there is for questions and discussion. Is that all right with everyone? All right. Dr. Khan, since you're all the way in Uruguay so early, could we perhaps hand over to you to give us your opening remarks in 5 minutes? And just share a bit from your perspective, the opportunities, the benefits, the challenges, your point of departure of South-to-South partnerships.
Yes, of course. Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. Congratulations for this new edition of the conference. I'm very happy to be part of this dialogue. I would like to be there with you, but it was impossible for me to travel. We are sustainable related. I'm getting a little bit of this Latin American South. I'm speaking from Uruguay, a country with very strong, long-standing and long-suffering ties with the African continent. And I think it's very important in today's world to strengthen the university internationalization, the South Cape, with the university extension, as we call it here in Latin America, and the community engagement at the center. May I share my screen?
That should be fine.
Yes. Here we are. No. Sorry. It's too early here, so this is my excuse. Well.
We've got your presentation up now.
Yeah. Can you see?
Yes, sir.
This image is from a Uruguayan artist, and the name is Our North is the Sun. Well, I would like to share 7 trends. Let's go to the. I would like to share 4 dimensions and 10 questions for a comparative and collaborative study program in South-South community engagement in this dialogue. No? Here in Uruguay, the tradition, the model of community engagement that was around now is the dominant one, the principal one, is a way to understand the community engagement very linked to the teaching activity, the way students study in the university, scholars teach. So the curricular dimension, the university extension, the curricula is very important. Maybe these questions and these dimensions are because of this tradition we have here. No? But I think we can organize our dialogue and future collaborative and comparative studies in these four dimensions of technology. Dimension one, which are our conceptions, both pedagogical and epistemological, in community engagement. What conceptual definitions and profile of activities are promoted, what pedagogical theories guide the action, our community engagement actions, how are actions evaluated and by whom, what place for social actors in the whole process and also the evaluations. The second dimension, the intentionalities and the horizons, what ideas of society are promoted or confronted, what is the place of the dimension of power and conflict in our conceptions and in our actions, the institutionalization. I mean, is it that regular activity as usual or extracurricular activity? Is it a teaching function or institutional? Academic or technical administrative tasks? Is it a regular or extracurricular activity for the students? How is it financed? What regulations are placed in the institutional organization? What debate, congress, conference, publication, this topic does exist. For last lecture, we can call the fields of the bank. The fields of the bank as an area that have all the social problems we are trying to resolve, but also the places, the territories of the subject. Which fields of the bank are more important and which have been marginalized in our policies and actions? What relationship is established between the community engagement and research? Does community engagement manage to influence the research agendas? I think that for first 5 minutes round, it's enough. Thank you very much, and let's continue to this dialogue.
Thank you very much, Dr. You actually did stick to 5 minutes. Thank you. I was worried when I saw the PowerPoint come. But I appreciate your time. Dr. Padiat, we can hand over to you to share your opening remarks.
Okay, my brief today is to speak on my own experiences with research in India that informed both my studies and continues to inform it, as well as my involvement in diasporic studies with the University of Mumbai. Okay, so just to give context to India-South Africa relations, I just want to start off with a kind of brief history and reference the earliest slaves that came to South Africa in the 16 and 1700s that were brought by the Dutch. So that was the first Indians that came to South Africa. We generally know the beginning of Indian settlement in South Africa as the 1860 indentured laborers, and then followed by the 1800s, 1800s when, 1880s when passenger Indians came in, but it actually predates that. So I just want to give some context between the India-South Africa link there. And of course, following on that, we've always had, with the Gandhi's passive resistance movement, we know then that there was that link when he fought for the civic rights of Indians in South Africa. So we know about that history. And then, but following upon that has been the link between the liberation movement of the ANC and India. In fact, India was the first country to sever all links with the white minority nationalist government in South Africa, the apartheid government. And so we have that kind of link, that historical bond that exists between India and South Africa. And then following upon our in post-apartheid South Africa, those links have continued, and Presidents Mandela and Mbeki after him and now continue to speak very on global stages about these historical links that we have with India. So just to kind of give some context to that. Of course, you know that also our rich history is in terms of our own liberation struggle, both the Indian liberation struggle and the struggle for liberation in this country. So we share that kind of history and, of course, that as well. Then in terms of my own experiences, my interest has been in Sri Aurobindo's integral education paradigm or approach to education, and particularly positioned in early childhood development. It's an education that seeks to draw in all dimensions of the child, rather than just privileging the cognitive dimension, right? So some of the learnings then that I can bring to this is, in terms of the first one, is the integrality of all the dimensions, the developmental dimensions in children that integral education brings. Then the yogic tradition of completeness of being is an important learning that I bring from India. Also, the quest for what drawn largely from Eastern metaphysics and spirituality is this quest for a higher consciousness, and not just primarily resting on the rational faculty, but a sense of a being beyond just where you are in the physical sense of it. Then also is a very strong sense of the collective, that we all live within communities, and that we reach out to communities as rather than just the kind of individualism and individualistic thinking that has been associated with Western education systems. Then in terms of my diasporic studies, the sense of the erasure of culture, of history, of ancestry that comes with colonial exposure and repression and oppression. So that is an extremely important aspect of my learnings as well. I think in terms of challenges, I could only draw on the language barriers. The barrier that's separated, especially during research. Much of the community that was interviewed for data collection spoke essentially in Hindi, and we needed translators. And I think besides that would be the only challenge that I could speak of. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. We're talking about South-South collaborations, but do we know what's the South? I'm asking the audience. Do we know what is the South? And why it is important for us to think about the South? So from a purely conceptual position, when we speak about the South, we're not talking about a geographic South. We are talking about an epistemological position where multiple epistemologies are produced and where struggles have occurred. So it doesn't matter whether these struggles are in Canada, in the US, in South Africa, in India. As long as this is a site for struggles, there is an opportunity to theorize, to conceptualize, to create and generate knowledge around why these struggles are important. So why then is it important for us to have a South-South collaboration, especially in the context of current global challenges and current global issues? It's really important because the South has, and when I speak of the South here, I'm talking of those previously unacknowledged, previously absent subjects in the context of the indigenous. So we all have had multiple struggles, whether as slaves from Africa, as the colonized in Africa, or as even prior to colonization, there were also struggles within with the establishment of African kingdoms. In South Africa, we speak of the emergence of the Zulu nation. We can speak of many nations in that regard. But what is important here for us to be aware of is within the context of these communities, there was knowledge. And with each colonial encounter, there was an erasure of that knowledge. So when we speak of the South, we're speaking of communities of scholars, communities of communities that are really looking to regain epistemic justice and to bring back that knowledge which had been lost as a result of all these forms or different types of violence that had happened. And this knowledge now, we're trying to recenter it, to begin to have serious dialogues, serious engagements about who we are as people from the South who had previously been excluded from the center of the knowledge generation process. So you ask, why is that important? It's really important because we have lived in a context or in a society where knowledge, or in a world where knowledge has been a universal form of knowledge. But the reality is there are multiple forms of knowledge. So when we speak of the South, we're not speaking of a homogeneous space. It's a plural space. And the advantage of a South-South collaboration, and I'm glad we have someone from Uruguay. The advantage of the South-South collaboration is we are able to engage in pluriversal or plurivocal engagements to really make connections of the multiple experiences that we have. So that adds and creates knowledge multiplicities that we then need to show the world that it's not only the European canon or the Western canon that is important. We can talk further and discuss the other examples of what are the other types of knowledge that are there. But I thought it was very important for us to start from the basics. When we say South-South collaboration, what is the South? Where does it come from? And why is it important? Thank you so much.
Good morning again. Before I start, and I'm going to time myself as I have to, this time I might be speaking from the heart because if I need to situate myself amongst these august people, I'm coming from the space of lived experience within the community engagement forum. Did anybody else notice how Kenya definitely excluded Jacob Zuma and his Indian counterparts? She went to the first two. Oh, wow. For those of you not acquainted with South African politics, catch me outside and I'll tell you wonderful stories. And I might even give you the So I have had the wonderful privilege in the last 15 years to be associated a bunch of engaged scholars and practitioners from across the globe. Most of the time that I've spent with these people has been in South Africa. And in South Africa, largely due to the South African Higher Education Community Engagement Forum, we had a practice, I say had, a practice of meeting like this at least twice a year. And the meetings weren't online, and the meetings didn't last a half an hour or 3 hours. They lasted an entire day, sometimes a day and a half. Why am I saying this? Because in that time, apart from reporting on what's happening at my university, I got to find out about what's happening at yours. And I got to know who you were. And some of my relationships, some of them scholarly, some otherwise, emerged as a result of community-engaged practitioners and scholars practicing community engagement while meeting to talk about community engagement. Let me unpack that quickly. The principles that underpin community engagement, I don't have to share them with you. The practices, the epistemologies, I can go on. When we find ourselves in spaces where we're just meeting, that's fine. When we find ourselves in spaces where we're meeting with the purpose of engaging with one another, well then, why don't we use the principles and practices that we teach about all the time and write about? Then what we'll do is we'll make the time to ensure we get to know the other. We treat each other equally, respectfully, and positionality doesn't matter because you and I understand in the work that we do, that's what we do best. So we should be able to hone those skills when dealing with one another. It's happened similarly, in a sense, on the international scale, except in that arena, almost all the teachings were online, much to my detriment. I struggle with the notion of online communication because I look at, as an introvert, I should love this, but I struggle with looking at a screen that gives me your initials. And I can't see the expression on your face. Are you smiling as I'm speaking? Are you frowning? Are you laughing at the jokes? How do I know that I'm engaging with you? I don't. Same thing when teaching online. I struggle. And so I enjoyed a relationship with an organization that I won't name for 4.5 years, just meeting online. And then when we meet in person, it's usually at a conference that lasts 2.5 days. And I started doing things like staying an extra 3 or 4 days and sometimes a week, spending time with 1 or 2 individuals who work with me on this board and getting to know them. And through getting to know them, getting to know what they do, their communities, their work, and think, wow, that's interesting. Why didn't we think about that before? Or maybe we have, and I just didn't know. So when questions are asked about why don't we, why is global dialogue, even if it's South-South or even North-South, but let's remain with South-South, why does this not happen often enough? I've come to a conclusion which I'd like to suggest, as for those of us who are deeply fascinated by this, it's because we often don't take the time to engage each other that we would ordinarily do when we do it in, with, for, and among the community. And we spent about 3-4 days with each other, and I'll confess, I've sat with mostly the people that I know. I've met a few people who are new, briefly, and I will confess as well that I was kind of obliged to because there's a couple of things that I've had to do while here. I come from a university and report to people who, you're going to the conference, but we still need you to give us your pound of flesh while I'm here. If there's anybody who can relate to me, let's talk and we'll exchange our lived experiences and maybe learn how to deal better with it. In fact, let me be blunt. I work for a person, and eventually you'll figure out who he is if you check it out, who doesn't think that someone with my qualifications and background should be engaged in this kind of work. Flatly. Well, so far, the uphill struggle has led me to meet the people on the stage, people here, and to say things like, can't we all get along? I say that deliberately for those of you who know the context. It was a gentleman saying that to a group of people, and you had to ask, who were you talking to? Were you talking to the police? Or were you talking to your community? Because in my mind, when he said those words, he actually wasn't talking to the police. That's 5 minutes, by the way, who brutalized him. he was talking to the community, in my view, who responded to his brutalization. So when I asked, can't we all get along? I mean, from my lived experience, if you've been through the trauma that I've been through to remain in the space, let's talk. Because we aren't the enemy, we aren't the ogre. We are the people that for some reason or the other, communities recognize, I can talk to her. She might be the only person in the university that I feel I can talk to. The more of us that exist, the more relevant our universities will become.
Well, thank you. I'm Matthias. I'm a PhD student at Cornell, but all my experience in community engagement come from Chile. I'm from Chile. I've just been in the US for 4 years. And I decided to study my PhD in the US because I noticed in the field of community engagement, the field within the US grew up without considering or with the absence of the Latin American tradition of community engagement that grows from Paulo Freire's kind of work. And I wanted to know why. So what I'm going to share today is thinking from that position, so after 4 years being there. And one of the things that are most shocking of this field of community engagement globally is that we have a thin theoretical framework and a strong body of assumptions when we're talking about community engagement. And the biggest assumption is that when we're talking about the university and community, we hope to believe that we're talking about the same things. But universities and communities are not the same everywhere. So there's a difference between the global south and the global north. And even if I agree with Greg about the epistemic component of the global south, there's also a geographical and material difference. The concentration of suffering is what I call the global south. So places where you can see the people suffering concentrated, there's the global south. The global north, even if they have suffering of the people, they will have other kind of things. The global north is the highest chances of imposing violence on other countries. So there's this colonial and imperial force that comes from the global north. So the global south are the recipients of coup d'etat organized by the global north. And in terms of these assumptions, if you think of the community, the biggest assumption in community engagement is that there's a divide between the university and the community. But the scholars from the global south, we don't feel that way. We are part of the suffering of the people. We are embedded in the destinies of our countries. We're not moving anywhere. So we feel part of the community. In terms of the universities are different because we also are struggling with global structural conditions in higher education. So we have to deal with academic capitalism, which is pushing our universities who are gaining profit for the so-called knowledge economy, and the growing administrative and managerial and bureaucratic aspect within the university. But also the global class, the world-class university project, which is expressed in the international rankings, in the way of understanding how the academy should be evaluated. If you see the international rankings, you will see that they are dominated by global north universities. And those are material conditions that the global south universities are struggling in a different way than the universities in the global south. But the global south is not just a place of suffering. It's also a place of resistance and creativity. And in the conversation of a south-south dialogue or south-north dialogue, we can bring things to the table. Even if we don't have the resources of the global south, we do have the urgency of acting now, of seeing changes in our community now. And that sometimes makes us work even beyond what we are being paid for. We also have the experience of seeing how societies can change. So we know that collective action and a struggle can generate change within societies as a whole. South Africa is the biggest example of that. And so that will make us bearers of hope that things can change. We also have a history of engaged scholarship. We don't know it very well, but conferences like this can open the lines of us trying to retrace those legacies of scholars, student movements that have been trying to create a different role of the universities. Today we were talking about the African university. So I'm running to the 5 minutes, just to say that my call is a call for action for the Global South, is recovering the agency from the Global South in the field of community engagement. We have something to offer, we have some needs, and I hope that later we can talk about how and what is the role of the Global North in that scenario. Thank you.
Right. We have 30 minutes for engagement. So I'm going to open it up to a series of questions and please try and be concise in your question. If you want to direct it to a particular panelist, please do say so. And then let's see if we can get 2 or 3 rounds going. Can I see some hands, please? There's a hand over there. That's one hand. Any other hands? Going once, going twice. Second hand over there. We'll start with those 2 hands. Renee.
Thank you, Saki. Thank you to the panelists. My question is around, we talked a lot around South-South, South-South-North, and I think, Matthias, you also mentioned it. So my question is around looking at this partnership, whether it's South-South, South-South-North, how do we reframe the narrative around Global South? And I mean, Global South was now contextualized in different ways. How do we reframe the narrative around Africa, the future, as it relates to the mobilization of diverse knowledge traditions? And maybe here to reflect on Africa and South America, since we have scholars from those specific continents.
Thank you. The second question over there.
Colleagues, thank you very much for your presentation. My question relates to the idea of plurality of space. Because I'm thinking, we happen to think that if we explain that suffering only happens in the South-South, that's where it's happening. But I'm thinking of Gaza, Afghanistan, partners in Central Africa. And I'm asking the question, do we really have to frame this in terms of a directional partnership, or is this co-learning in terms of epistemic justice?
All right. Thank you very much. We'll start with those 2 questions for the panel, just in short. The first one's around how to reframe the narrative around the Global South. And of course, you can tackle that as you deem appropriate, with particular reference to Africa in the future. And the second one's around the plurality of space, and really around whether or not we have to frame this partnership in terms of directional lineages around whether less is partnership. Dr. Augustine, I hope you heard those 2 questions. I don't know if you have any insights, but if so, I'd like to start with you. Did you get that? All right, we might be experiencing some technical difficulties, so we'll come back. I'll look to our panelists here. Would anyone like to have the first shot with those questions? Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not so ready, but no, that's okay. So, in terms of plurality of spaces, I will say that the global dialogue that I'm imagining, it's a global dialogue that starts with reciprocal questions. It's not just sharing our cases or sharing the best practices of the Global South. It's about sharing our problems as questions that need to be answered so we can learn from each other from that starting point. I will say also that there's this South and North conversation. It's tricky because in the North, in the Global North, you also will find concentrations of suffering. So there's also South in the North as there is North in the South. The North in the South, and how I see it in community engagement, it's people they're best known, they're most interested in learning how in the US they are developing their own concepts, models, and even worse, they're thinking that those concepts and those models are the best for our context. And in the case of the South and the North, my experience in the US is that there's a new generation of engaged scholars within the US that come from Latino communities, African American communities, LGBTQ, women, even indigenous people within the US that might find new allies in the Global South. Because their struggle and their suffering is not necessarily being addressed by those power dynamics within the Global North. And so I see them part of this conversation too. We, as a Global South, we should be looking at those scholars in a way of engaging with their own struggle and see if we can build partnerships out of that. And that's what I can say.
If I can quickly comment on the second question, if I understood it correctly. But first, by way of example, the Knowledge for Change Consortium, about which I'm pretty sure Dai is happy to share as much with you as you have time to learn about, is a a collection of universities and their community partners from, I'm going to get it wrong now, 15 countries, largely from the Global South, almost exclusively, and 22 hubs. When this organization was first established, the South exclusively. The exception being that one of the founders happened to be from Canada. And then as it evolved, that question emerged as well. We must not imagine that all the things that affect us in the South, people in the North, but global North, I like the definition. We need to bear in mind it's not geographic. It's largely geographic in terms of where the colonizers came from. And that's it, by the way. That's what makes it geographic. And how they were eventually invited to leave. The realization by this organization is there are people who are kindred spirits who really are involved in the work that we are, community-based participatory research, in countries that belong to the global north, where the work that they're doing doesn't ordinarily resemble the work of the global north. And so they were a visit to the august group. No, you can say Gaza is in the north, but it would be hard to argue it's part of the global north. Very hard. And then, I'll stop there.
All right. So, just as a point of reference, we engage in this work to co-learn. I like the term co-learn because our realities are not the same, our histories are not the same, but what makes us similar is that to a certain extent we have all suffered epistemic violence, right, in the South. So we co-learn how to navigate that and the advantage of such conversations. So I'm now tying it up with the first question. The advantage of such conversations and such groupings is we are creating spaces for cognitive diversity, and that's important. So how do we reframe the narrative? Or how do we then begin to take charge of the narrative? By doing this. This is the first thing. By doing this. The second thing, we do have a journal, African Higher Education. Sorry, Dr. Mistry. African Higher Education Journal on Community Engagement, is it? It's there. Yeah, all the way there. Yep. So that's the second thing we need to be doing. The only way we can start to control the narrative is to show alternative thinking, alternative logic to what has been prescribed as mainstream. So we need, and that's maybe by the time, it might not happen in our lifetime, fortunately or unfortunately, but at some point, the theories or theoretical positions that come from such engagements, especially around community engagement or any other scientific thinking, might become mainstream if we push enough advocacy, science advocacy, and intellectual pressure to really begin to reframe the narrative. It's not, we don't need anyone to do, we have to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think just to also add to what Darren and Gray are saying in terms of the movements for change, and especially to speak about the UNESCO's Knowledge for Change project, and it starts with this kind of knowledge for democratizing knowledge, and movements such as this help us reframe. But as Gray indicates, it starts from us. In terms of the plurality, I think we refer really to all subalterns, and geographic, and we are not really confined because of the fluidity of movement and of people's movements. We find ourselves as subalterns in various spaces of the world, and that's what we must acknowledge.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try again to see, Dr. Kano, if you can hear us now. Yes, you can. Would you have any insights you'd like to share?
Yes, can you hear me?
Clearly.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't understand you. You were waiting for me to respond. I lost the sound for a moment. I think that Dr. Kayas said before, it's important to think about what we are talking about when we say the South, community, social problems. He asked himself. I think, as he said also, that is also a look at a perspective or an horizon that the Mexican sociologist Pablo González Casanova used to say. I agree with what you have mentioned, the epistemological dimension in the construction of this perspective. It's from the tower. Epistemological dimension that can articulate the problems of the present with that future horizon. And in this point, the community engagement actions can place tasks to be developed with concrete and conform, and with concrete actors and assumptions, and in particular the social movement. From that point is that I think that this is a strategical decision to strengthening the community engagement as a way to democratize the way that the our university are built nowadays. No? In particular, the way that we can, from the community engagement actions, influence the university agenda of research. Thanks.
All right. We have time for one more round of questions. I'd like to say, oh, hands are shooting up. I might be in trouble. We'll see if we can't take four. So I see one over here. I see two. I see three. Is there a fourth hand? No. Oh, I saw that's number three. Going once, going twice. So, number 4 is away. So we'll start with the hand over here, if possible. This row.
This is my pen again. I always thought I understood the term global south and global north up until today. Thank you for unpacking it for some of us. As you were talking, I quickly thought, is there any, based on your experience, is there any resource center or is there any library that is already reflecting the global south perspective in terms of their collection?
Thank you very much. Second question over here.
Thank you so much, Saki.
People just talking a bit loud.
I've got flu. Oyama Soga here. So I was just thinking, Saki, this might be a bit of a tangent, but I'm thinking conversations that took place yesterday, input from the DVC this morning, and also input from our panelists. And I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate for the panelists now who have to respond to this question that I have that I've been thinking about deeply. For all the conversations when we were here for the yesterday and this morning, I want to ask the panelists if they could respond to this question. What is the role of students in repositioning community engagement in universities? And what social value will it bring in all knowledge spaces and fields, and also in society? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dr. Horace, can you just make your question the third one, and then we'll end at the back.
So thank you for bringing up the sort of north and the south and south and the north. One of the things that I found doing the community engagement classification, particularly in Australia, was this deference to the United States in so many ways, and the scholars of the US. And so I had to be like, no, you create your own, you set your own standards, but that's because of my positionality as someone who comes from Puerto Rico, who has experienced the identity of being colonized and then bringing that perspective to the work that I do. And so I'm wondering, based on a comment about thinking about the default to the global north, this is part of the reason why I'm so excited about South Africa coming in, because I don't think that I will have to be like, don't defer to the US, right? But how do we counter that default that happens in so many spaces? And then how do you think solidarity can exist, particularly with communities of color in the global north who are more aligned with what's happening here and in the global south than they are aligned with what's happening, and they're actually pushing against what's happening in the global north?
And the last question at the back.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. My name is Eugene from University of Pretoria. I just have a question. Matthias said something quite interesting, but of course anyone can respond to that. You said in the global south, we don't really have resources, but we have agency when coming to community engagement. I'm quite intrigued with such a statement, given that with us, when we teach our students, we tell them, even in the very local community that are so resourceful, what they need is somebody to just raise awareness in terms of the local resources that are there, and they should use that. You speak of minerals in terms of resources, South Africa, Africa, global south. You speak of human resources. How many skilled people are being recruited because we have that? You speak of land, not just land, but fertile land material. So I just want you to unpack that for us to understand what you mean when you say we don't have resources. Thank you.
All right. 4 questions for our panelists, thematically focused on if there's a resource center somewhere that could be found, linking to the various conversations and positioning and repositioning the role of CE and students within that and universities, countering the narrative around deferring to the global north in the US. And I guess in some parts also helping to foster solidarity. And then the last one touching on this, not just partly to you, but to anyone here, this thing of we don't have resources, but we do have agents. What is the implication of that? I'll give each panelist a few minutes to respond to either of those as you deem necessary. Dr. Kano, I'll end with you. And then in your response, if you could also share one or two last resorts, and then we'll wrap up the discussion.
Right.
I'm not in a position to answer the three questions on. I don't come from a university, so the teachers here asked us to answer that. But I think I can answer your question in terms of pushing back, in terms of the kind of hegemony that that the US, of course, is notorious for. But we come from a long history of struggle. I think we've been pushing back all our lives. So, yeah, I think from our own lived experiences, we're able to counter those kinds of things and bring in our own experiences to inform that.
No, thank you so much. These are very good questions, very well pointed out. So the first one on a resource center, there is an emerging scholarship around colonial studies, which forms part and parcel of extending or building upon the southern theories. There's quite a lot of scholars around this. Yesterday, Prof. Keats mentioned Black sociology. There is diaspora studies as well, if you think about it from the north. So there is a huge collection of literature around this, and I could give you scholars, I can direct you to that as well, and African studies. The role of students in repositioning community engagement. So universities have a primary responsibility to produce what we might term productive, engaged, critical, democratic citizens. It's important. So we do have the main curriculum where we teach them botany, sociology, psychology, education, but we also need to have a stronger, and I emphasize this bold and in capital letters, stronger co-curricular emphasis, which is important to support this. Now, I am not saying community engagement is co-curricular. It actually needs to be embedded in mainstream curriculum. But if we are speaking of really putting in the students there, the sites where they would then be able to practice what they have learned in the mainstream curriculum would be through the co-curricular, or we emphasize work integrated learning. I think Prof. Darren would speak on that better. On work integrated learning, and how and why it would be important to really support and train students to work with communities from the various disciplines beyond the normal disciplines. And then the next one, the third question, which is a very difficult question, around moving away from the US as the default. That's a very difficult question. Why? Because resources, as in financial resources, are centered there. It's an unfortunate reality. There is resources in South Africa, but also South Africa will still have to look to the US. And the reality is that we need the money. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. We need the money. So one way in which you can start to do that is to find allies in the West we engage in what we might term academic diplomacy to really start to give counter narratives, but in a very diplomatic way. Because remember, he who pays the piper demands the tune. It's that simple. And we're not blind to that reality. So we know most of the funding, most of the money is in the West. How go to the West is another conversation. But the bottom line is it's in the West, and we need to bring it back to the South. So we need allies in the West. We engage in academic diplomacy, and we really push very hard for that to be done. The issue of agency versus resources, it's also a very good question. We do have the agency, we need the resources. How we define those resources, I normally, when I'm, because I teach in community development, I always emphasize community vision. The community itself must tell us the resources it needs. And in the context of the universities, we need to be able, because what the University of the Free State might want is not the same as what DUT might need. But we are all needing resources in different quantums, in different sizes, in different forms, in different shapes. So it's always best to the definition of resources to really be left to the ones who need it. Well, as one of my students once said, resources are like beauty, they lie in the eye of the beholder.
Students, at the risk of oversimplifying it, I was once asked a question in the context of, we don't really have a community engagement office. This is like a decade ago, so how do we organize ourselves? And my thoughts were, okay, I think a decade or two after the liberation of this country, far too many of our first-year students are first-generation first-year students. So after 2 years at university, you can go back to any member of your family, generally, or your community, and just simply have a conversation. This is what I'm studying. We call it sociology. Huh? Unpack that for them. Unpack that with them, because they're going to be questions. Oh, okay. So we're spending so much money for you to tell us about this. In a different context, the university I'm from, a lot of the stuff that we offer is unknown in the communities we work with. So our students often represent the best examples of telling somebody what especially youngsters at school, what does a food technologist do? What does a master mariner do? And there's value in that because we kind of know a teacher, doctor, lawyer, and I can list the whole, we know intuitively because these are people we work with and see every day. But a master mariner, fancy word for someone who sails ships. And you need a particular qualification for that. And who knew? You need mathematics and physical science. If you don't know that, and if the teachers aren't telling people or sharing it, you have an role to play. Start there without a community engagement office. If you have one, knock on the door and ask, how can I be of help? In the process, if you say that you, as a student, you've been in community engagement for some time, okay, ask yourself, often enough, what have I learned? Write it down if you want to. But please also ask yourself, what have I unlearned? Write that down, preferably in bold, so that you can actually see that the process of learning involves unlearning. It involves deciding that the mind of the oppressor may be the most fertile ground for us community engagement activists. Sorry, got that wrong. Oppressed. I was trying to quote Steve Biko. Because the mind of the oppressor is relatively understood. The mind of the oppressor, they conditioned us. They did this to us. But at some point, we continue their legacy by doing this to ourselves. And it has to come to an end. Two perfect examples to me that's universal, global north and global south. Migration and sexual harassment. Nice examples. Migration. I wept when I watched on our TV what South Africans were doing to our brothers and sisters from north of our border when they housed the very people who led us into liberation. The Europeans have the excuses. Oh, these people come from Africa. Oh, these people. The Americans have the excuse. These people come from Latin America. These people. What's our excuse? How do you kill people who at some point were responsible for harboring the people who... Anyway, migration affects the north and it affects the south. And how are we responding to the issue of migration as community engaged scholars and practitioners? Sexual harassment? Big story. 15 years ago, in a meeting, 15 people in a meeting to discuss how are we going to deconstruct the sexual harassment policy into something that the university can. In that meeting, as a mathematician, very easy, 3 women. If this kind of practice continues, not the sexual harassment, but we need to talk about things that are affecting A, or are they conceptualized? And as we have the meeting, there are 75 other people, B, C, D, T, up to Z, and 4, 5, 8. Well, we're doing something wrong. We need to learn how to count, which I'm happy to show you how to do, by the way, in a number of ways, that hopefully get us to the point where we realize we have to unlearn. And last but not least, just to add to the resources, I don't suggest what Matthias meant, but I understood. I say this often and people don't like to say it. In South Africa and all over, we have haves and have-nots. In community engagement, we have haves and we have have-nots. What do I mean by the have-nots? Our resources are limited. There's gold in our country. Not so much electricity, but there's gold in our country. That means nothing to me in my organization if we don't have the resources to do what we think we should be doing. And we can trash them if we want to. But if you look at the US, just based upon the number of colleges that there, 3,500, 4,500, how many do we have? 26 publics and about a few others. The scales are different. They have resources. They can, people who get me, they can always travel anywhere in the world. And even if they don't have the money, their visas, their passports, take them anywhere. Don't have the luxury. Especially when conferences are priced in US dollars and you have to get the visa first, and that's a headache because you need 8 months warning. So we have it hard. And for those of us who, in spite of the difficulty of getting by, we need to make sure that we continue to organize ourselves so that they don't like underling, but they, you know what, let me look at you, because you're my friend. That the people that you might be representing understand that we have difficulties sustaining the relationship. We do. The one thing I've learned from this young man, in our conversations that we've been having, is if the only way that we are connected to each other is to ice us. And then when my time of office is over, and when we're no longer involved, we no longer have a relationship. That's beginning to describe that whole post that I suggested yesterday. This project brought to you by the University of X. This relationship was brought to you by ISIS. 5 years from now, neither of us work at ISIS, neither of us work with each other. That's what this is. We don't need the global north for the global south to work with each other.
Well, I came all the way from Chile, so I will take time to answer all the questions. So the first one on centers. There's one publication, a book that came in 2011 that is called The Engaged University. That was a study conducted, led by the Talwar Network for Civic Engagement. And the scholars that were the authors of the book were all from the global north, Oxford University and Tufts University. But they were studying the global south. And in their conclusions, they were saying, okay, we found a way of engaging that comes from the global south. But that story and that analysis came from global North scholars. So they found commonalities. But I would say that that's, even if that's a good exercise, we need to invest in more research that comes from the Global South, that is about the Global South. And I see in IRSLICE, the International Association for Service Learning and Community Engagement, an opportunity to do that. I'm participating in that space since last year, but I'm not giving my time freely. I'm investing my time in that association to open more spaces for Global South research. And that research, I imagine that is addressing certain aspects that haven't been addressed yet. The global dynamics in community engagement. The Carnegie classification is one example of this global dynamics that is happening, that come from the US. They're really interesting. Others, for example, the global engaged learning. So how people from the US are using service learning and sending students for 1 week or 2 weeks to the Global South so they can learn something about it. Those are the global dynamics that I think we should be doing research about, but also about our practices. There are not that much comparative studies. There's not much about the legacies that we have of engaged research, engaged scholarship in the Global South. I would say, I shared yesterday about the historiography of Latin American community engagement. We should be reading and looking at our past to understand what we are doing today. So we require more research. In terms of the students, last year and in the first issue of the African Journal of Community Engagement, there's an article that we wrote about the Latin American critical community engagement. And everything started by the students, a student movement.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to ask you to wrap up because we are unfortunately over time.
Okay.
And I'm going to give Dr. Kano.
Okay, I'm sorry. So, okay, I would say that, for example, in terms of the students, there's another assumption from the US that is service learning usually assumes that the student is part of an elite. And that is a reality in the US. But in the Global South, that's not necessarily true. And we can ask more about engaged scholarship through the curriculum. Service learning is a low standard for the things that we need in the Global South. The students are not part necessarily of the elite. They could be leaders of their own communities. They could create change in our societies. And that's one of the assumptions that I think we should be questioning. The other two questions I will have to answer in the coffee.
Can anyone please indulge to give Dr. Kano 2 minutes to share some remarks? So Dr. Kano, we need to wrap up, but I'd love to give you 2 minutes just to touch on anything critical you want to.
Yeah, thanks. If we look at the history of community engagement in the Latin American universities, we can see that historical trend is a change in the role of the student movement to having a leading role, to lose it, leave it place to different modalities of institutionalization or professionalization of the community engagement actions. We should take a leading role again. Will young academics or young scholars take its place? I don't know. But in any case, I think we need to take this dialogue beyond sharing the research results or projects and build this dialogue somehow from the ground up. For that, I think we can start with 4 possible tasks. The first one, the community of practices that you were saying, I think it's a very, very important proposal. Joint publications and research. Third, mobility of students and the scholars focusing on community engagement actions. On the last one, try to focus on some common problems for a common agenda of intervention and research. For example, forced migrations, inequality, colonialism, exploitation of our natural resources, and so on. I think with this task we can do that, and I hope the student movement came back. Came back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists, to Dr. Augustine for waking up so early to join us. Please ask more questions as the day goes on. And a round of applause, please, for the panel for their.
Thank you so much, Sake, and to the colleagues for such an engaging dialogue around South and South partnerships. So we are running a little bit late, but we will definitely be continuing with the next session. Just, I'd like to announce something that the presentations at the Yellowwood Terrace will now be moving on this venue. I'm sorry, on the venue 3. Meaning that we will still have the poster presentation at 12:30. It's just that not at 12:30, but 20 minutes after. But the next two presentations, which is presentation from President Mulu as well as George Foster, will move into venue 3 at Atherstone, which is this venue, and then at 12:30 or straight after that, we will have the poster presentation. Thank you so much, colleagues.